First, what is an indicator? According to the definition, it is a factor used to measure the progress in the achievement of expected results. When you design your indicators in the log frame, you have to pay attention to all the elements of the horizontal logic, not only to the specific wording of the indicator, but also to the definition of the baselines and the targets and the sources of verification. Baselines tell us what the situation at the start of the intervention is. For most of the output indicators, it is quite easy because you have 0 as the baseline by definition, given that the outputs are about the direct results of the intervention activities. But at the outcome and impact level, for some indicators, well-established baselines are really crucial to be so that you can measure the change produced by the intervention. You really need to check whether you can get the baseline values already when you are designing your log frame and defining indicators. Of course, you need to define targets to be able to say whether you achieved your result or not at the end. And the sources of verification are very important because they tell where to find the values of the indicator or how data will be collected. So the sources of verification determine to a large extent the quality of your indicator. Here is an example of 2 indicators with well-defined baseline and target values and sources of verification. The first indicator is a qualitative indicator, status of new law on cybercrime, with the situation at the start of the project being that the law is under discussion, and the target is that the law is approved by the Parliament by 2022. And the source of verification is official journal. Some people try to avoid using qualitative indicators, or they consider them as not so good as quantitative indicators. But we cannot say this in general. It really depends on what you want to measure. For example, in this case, you could turn this qualitative indicator into quantitative one, like formulating it with number of laws on cybercrime approved by the Parliament. But then you would have your baseline value 0 and the target would be 1. And you would not be able to measure anything in between your baseline and target. So it would be a kind of binary indicator 0, 1, which is not very interesting for monitoring. With the qualitative indicators, we have it status of new law. You can report on different stages of the legislative process in each of your progress reports. So you really can track the progress towards your target. The second indicator is quantitative. It's stunting prevalence in children aged less than 5, with baseline being 40% and the target 30%. So we aim at a decrease in the stunting prevalence. And the sources of verification could be, if you are lucky, that you have some open source data like the annual WHO UNICEF World Bank report on child malnutrition. It's the best scenario. But then if this open source data is not available, you need to organize your own data collection. So you need to foresee some baseline and end-light surveys. And this means that you have to include these surveys as your activity in your work plan and in your budget. So that's why it is very important to be clear about your source of verification since the log frame design stage when you put your indicator in the log frame, because it can have impacts on your activities and the budget. Now let's go through some key quality criteria for indicators. First is about the relevance of the indicator to the measured result. This means that your indicators in the log frame should measure exactly the result they are assigned to. For example, if you have a result increase economic growth, then your indicator will be annual GDP growth rate, and you should not include indicators measuring, for example, the level of poverty. Any other indicators than those measuring the result are irrelevant and shouldn't be in the log frame. In some cases, you do not have a direct measure of your results, so you need to use some proxy indicators. For example, if your result is about gender equality in economic and social rights, you cannot measure it directly, and you would use an indicator such as proportion of women in managerial positions, which provides an indication on gender equality. So it's okay to use the proxy indicators as long as they are relevant to the result. The second criterion is that the indicator has to be placed at the right result level. This is why it is very important to establish the results levels of outputs, outcomes, and impacts correctly in the results chain. That's what Milena presented yesterday. When your results are at the right level, it is also easier to find the right indicators. If we use our previous example of status of a new law with the target law adopted by the parliament, you understand this is an outcome level indicator. The adoption of the law is not under the control of the intervention. If you want to have an indicator at the output level on what you can do or what the intervention can do for improving the legislative framework in a country, you can use the same indicator, status of the law, but with the target law drafted, or at the best, the draft law accepted by the ministry. Then the formulation or the wording of the indicator is very important. It should be defined in precise and unambiguous terms that describe clearly and exactly what is being measured. You need to avoid any possible misinterpretation. Also, you cannot mix two or more aspects in one indicator. You cannot have an indicator number of users and their satisfaction with the quality of the service. You need to split it in two. So it's good to measure both aspects, but you need two indicators. You need also be clear about the unit of measurement. So whether you measure it in number or percentage or any other unit you may have. An indicator needs to be measurable. So it has to be possible to collect data on your indicator, and also it has to be affordable to collect those data for the intervention. If you cannot get data from open data sources, you need to organize your own data collection with a study or survey. And such surveys may be costly, so you also need to take into account the cost of data when designing your indicators, whether you can afford to collect data. That's why it is important to be specific on the sources of verification since the beginning. Otherwise, you may realize during the implementation that even though you have a well-defined indicator, there is no data available, and you have not enough resources to collect data for it. If you are using some open data sources, you need also check whether data are periodically updated to have an updated value at the end of the implementation. For some indicators, data are only collected every 2, 3, or 5 years. So you have to check if the indicator is suitable for you. Use appropriate disaggregation. Every time you have a person-related indicator, it should be disaggregated by sex. Then, depending on the context, other types of disaggregation may be useful, such as by country, especially if you have a multi-country intervention, by age groups, disability status, migration status, ethnic groups, and so on. Finally, the whole indicator framework should be appropriate so that your indicators really capture and measure all important results of the intervention. Here are some other good practices for defining indicators. You should build on the partners' capacities and existing systems as much as possible to contribute to further developing partners and many capacities. You should also use a good mix of qualitative and quantitative indicators to capture both aspects, the quantity and quality. For example, the number of people having access to a new service, but also their satisfaction with the quality of the service. All the results need to be measured in the log frame. So you need to have at least one indicator for each result. But also the total number should be reasonable for monitoring purposes. If you focus only on results-oriented indicators, you will always have an appropriate number of indicators because, well, it's not easy to define good results-oriented indicators. Good practice is to have 2-3 indicators per result. Usually, when we see there are too many indicators in the log frame, it's because these are process indicators measuring the activities, such as number of trainings organized. These activity-related indicators are easy to define, easy to measure, but they are not measuring the results, so they should not appear in the log frame. This was, for example, the case of the El Pacto project, the case that was presented yesterday, which started with more than 90 indicators, and most of them were the process indicators measuring the activities. So we do not want to monitor the progress in the implementation of activities in the log frame. This is something which is measured in the work plan and can be reported in the progress reports when you report on your activities, but it shouldn't be in the log frame. It is recommended to use as much as possible standard, generally agreed and accepted indicators. These can come from partner country strategies, or you can use the SDGs. There are also lists of indicators which are prioritized depending on the source of funding. For example, for the EU Trust Fund, you have a list of indicators. And for all EU-funded interventions, you should check the indicators included in the EU results framework, or now it will become the Global Europe results framework for the interventions under the new programming period. I will show you where to find them on the next slide. You can also use the EU member states results frameworks. Some of them have it, and sometimes also the implementing organizations have their own results frameworks. When you implement an EU-funded intervention, you need to insert your log frame in the OPSI system. It's a new IT system of the European Commission, and Milena will have a presentation on this later today. I will just concentrate on indicators. So when encoding the indicators in OPSIS, you are provided with a library of core indicators from which you can select, depending on the sector of your intervention. Of course, you can insert your own customized indicators, but it is good to use the OPSIS core indicators as much as possible because these are well-established indicators and it facilitates the aggregation of results from different interventions. The OPSIS core indicators include in the first place the EU results framework indicators or the new Global Europe results framework indicators. And you can find them on Capacity for Dev on the website with the link provided. You have 3 levels of these indicators. Level 1 indicators are high-level, impact-level indicators tracking development progress in partner countries. These are mainly SDG indicators. Then you have level 3 indicators, the lowest level. It's about the EC performance. how the policy, it's about the policy priority mainstreaming in the EC policies. But what's interesting for you is the level 2 indicators, which focus on outcomes and outputs of EU intervention. So these are the ones you can use in your log frame. There are 30 EURF indicators, and for the GERF, there will be 39 indicators. And these are divided per sector, so you can check this list and those indicators that are related to the sector of your intervention to see whether they are relevant to your intervention and whether you can include them in your log frame. And if you can, you should, because it then really facilitates the aggregation of the results and the reporting of the EC on these aggregated results. Also, when you click on these indicators, you can click on each of them and you get a methodological note about each indicator with a clear definition. So it can be also very useful. Then OPSI score indicators include SDG Tier 1 indicators, which are SDG indicators with internationally established methodology and standards, and for which data are produced by at least 50% of countries. You have also indicators from the EU Gender Action Plan 3, and finally you have a selection of key sector indicators which you can find on the results and indicators for development website on Capacity for Dev. So that's the website Milena already showed you yesterday with the results changed and indicators for some specific sectors. For each big sector, you have some subsectors, and by clicking on them, you get this results chain with predefined outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And when you double click on any of these results, you get a list of relevant indicators. Okay, so now I will go through some examples of indicators. I will show a weak example and then the correct formulation of that indicator. So the first one is an impact indicator, impact level indicator, decrease in the incidence of malaria. We agree that this is okay for the impact level. We may have an impact on the reduction of the incidence of malaria. But the problem here is with the formulation, because indicators should be formulated in a neutral way. For example, malaria incidence per 1,000 population, and they should not include the target or the direction we want to achieve. So the word decrease may be a bit confusing. For example, when you are reporting a value, then to decide whether you use the plus or minus sign and so on. So it's always better to use just the neutral formulation of the indicator, and you have a specific column for baseline and targets, which define clearly whether you want an increase, decrease, and so on. For outcome indicators, the first one is number of people made aware about the importance of improved hygiene practices. So here the formulation is okay. It's quite clear what we want to measure. But the issue is that this is not really the outcome level, because increased awareness is something that is under the control of the intervention. It is a function of our awareness raising activities that we implement. So at the outcome level, we want to measure the change in the behavior of the target groups. So the indicator could be percentage of the targeted population applying improved hygiene practices. And we disaggregate by sex because it's a person-related indicator. And then you can add any relevant disaggregation, for example, by the target area. The second example is satisfaction of citizens with the safety in target city. In this case, the level is okay, because it is something that we may be interested at the outcome level to measure. But the problem is the formulation, because you don't know, you cannot put a value to satisfaction of citizens. So you need to define it more precisely, such as percentage of citizens who are very or fairly satisfied with the safety in the target city. Again, you disaggregate by sex, and then you can disaggregate by age groups, migration status, and so on. And the third example is cybercrime adequately covered by the National Strategic Framework. So this is what we see quite often in the log frames, but this formulation again is not a formulation of an indicator, but it's more our objective that we want to achieve. And the correct formulation would be extent to which cybercrime is mentioned in the National Strategic Framework. And such indicator can then take different values and you can report on it. And finally, for the output level indicators, we have an example, new disaster risk reduction strategy adopted and implemented. So for this indicator, there are two issues. First is the level. As explained by Milena, adopted and implemented is not something that we would see at the output level. So that's outcome level. And then the second issue with this indicator is the formulation. So in this case of indicators, it's best to use status of the new disaster risk reduction strategy. And for the output, your target would be draft accepted by the ministry. The last example is number of trainings organized. So this is an example of process indicator, activity-related indicator, which we shouldn't include in the log frame. And instead, we want to measure the results. So you should try to measure number of farmers trained by the intervention who increase their knowledge and skills in organic farming. Yes, this is measuring your output, which could be the increased knowledge or strength and capacities. So that's all from me, but if there is time, I can take some questions if there are some questions that were not answered in the chat.
Thank you, Jan. That's excellent. I actually don't think we had any questions in the chat. So I'm presuming that everything was very, very clear. And if not, when you get into your working groups today, if some questions come to you, you can pose them to the facilitators in the working group. And given we're bang on time, maybe I will suggest, keeping us all going in the right direction, that we move on to the next session. So Milena, will I let you introduce this?
Yeah, thank you. So the reason why I wanted to include a presentation of a survey, basically a research product that could be used for monitoring in this session today on indicators, is because I find that often there is an unexplored potential in these reports that we frequently publish in our projects to be used for monitoring. We sometimes lack funding for monitoring and we say, okay, the budget is so limited, I have to keep my indicators very basic, but we don't realize that in these surveys and studies that we're doing, whether with private sector organizations or civil society or the population in target communities, we have the opportunity to find some data for indicators that we can have in our log frames also. And especially at outcome level where we're often missing good indicators. Where we want to measure behavior change, changes in perceptions, in attitudes, and we don't make the link simply that, okay, this will require a survey. Either I budget for 2 surveys in my M&E component to be able to see the difference before and after my intervention, or do I have an ongoing survey in my organization, or is there another organization that is surveying on the same or similar field? So I think these are good questions to ask ourselves. And today we will hear about one such survey that is available from the British Council for different countries that are of interest for DG INTPA, but probably also for your governments. It's called The Next Generation. And I will then hand it over, I think it's Christine who starts. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Milena. Can everyone hear me okay? I've got slightly flaky connection at the moment. Am I okay? Okay. Let me know, wave at me if not. My colleague David is also here from our Lebanon office. He'll be talking a bit later on, but he's also in charge of the slides. So I'm the Director of Research and Policy Insight at the British Council, and I've been running the Next Generation programme for about 6 years now. I'll explain a little bit about what it is and why it may be useful. So David, could you move us on, please? Thank you very much. Okay, so just a little bit about the background of the research. It's been going since 2009 in Pakistan, and the very first one there really set the tone of what we're trying to do. Since then, we've done a few. We reviewed the program in 2015 in order to give us a more consistent methodology and branding, and we reviewed again in 2021 to ensure we're more aligned with the aim to support policy making around young people, and also to ensure that the program is a little bit more participatory. But the crucial point here is what we hope distinguishes our research from others is it's not looking solely at young people and their problems, which does tend to be the focus quite often, nor is it looking solely at the idea of a demographic dividend. We find the risk of instrumentalizing young people is quite disempowering for them. It also doesn't really take a holistic view of them as social agents and change makers, and if it only is focusing on their economic value. So we do talk about education, we do talk about employability, but we try and do that in the round. So empowerment capability, very much, I think, the watchwords of what we are attempting to do. David, could we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as I said, we do talk about education and employment, but there's a very big focus for us on civic engagement and voice and participation. And time again, that is actually one of the things that comes up with the young people that we talk to. So whether that's in Bogota or whether that's in Istanbul or whether that's in Hanoi, that's what we tend to hear young people want to talk to us about. But being the British Council and a global organisation, we look at how they're navigating the world, how they see the outside world, and particularly their values and what they see changing around them. We're also really interested in that intergenerational aspect. Okay, David, can we move on? Right, the next slide covers methodology. There we are, thank you. So Milena mentioned the survey. So there is a survey in each one of the studies, and that would be a representative sample of young people. And so we ensure that we have enough of a sample to be able to disaggregate by sex and gender, also by cadres within the age group. We tend to take a younger ones who may still be in further or higher education or recently left school, and then an older age group who might be slightly more having entered the world of work for some time. We also look at urban, rural, peri-urban. We look at economic background, educational background, and so on. We also, as it says there, where appropriate, we look at booster samples to ensure that the voices of often excluded communities, such as LGBT youth, can be heard. But we also do a lot of qualitative research. And increasingly we're looking at making that more participatory and more creative. So as well as interviews and focus groups, looking at photo elicitation, diarising, films, and other ways that young people can really we can get deeper into understanding their lives, their concerns and their needs. When it comes to analysis, conclusions and the recommendations, which are focused on a wide range of policy stakeholders, again, we're trying with each one to be more participatory, but always to ensure that we have a youth advisory board that supports the process the whole way through. And because we start with a literature review that also includes a review of the policy landscape, it ties back into that policy set of recommendations at the end. Next slide, please. These are just a few of the countries where we've done these. I can provide a full list maybe afterwards in the chat, but you can see there Lebanon, Vietnam, the island of Ireland, Nigeria, Poland, and Sri Lanka. Underway at the moment is Next Generation Indonesia, which will be coming out towards the end of this year, as will another edition of Next Generation Pakistan, looking back a few years and seeing what changes have taken place ahead of the elections taking place in Pakistan next year. And crucially, just to say obviously why we're doing this as well, we're really interested in comparisons horizontally as well as longitudinally, as far as we possibly can, because part of what we're trying to do in the British Council is obviously connect young people in the UK with their peers around the world. This sort of sits as part of our programming around young people and their sense of leadership, whether that's formal leadership or more informal styles of leadership. So that sort of cross-cultural connection is important to us. This next slide, just so you can see just a slightly different approach that we have done in a couple of countries so far, which is the Next Steps research. So each of these takes sort of works off the back of a next generation and looks either a little bit more in depth at a particular subject. So Next Steps Myanmar looked in more depth at the role of young people in democratic change in Myanmar, and that came out early last year. Next Steps Lebanon, I think David will talk a little bit more about how that works. There was so much change taking place throughout the process of doing Next Generation Lebanon that Next Steps was almost necessary for us to do in order to validate some of what we'd found. And again, that comes back, I think, to that point about the research integrity. There's a link at the end of this presentation to where you can see all of the Next Generation studies, but to all the participants here, I'd absolutely urge you to look them up, to use them. And if you would like to come back to me, if you want to get any more detail, I can always put you in touch with the relevant country colleagues as well. David.
Thanks, Christine. Sorry, let me just move my own slides forward now. So I'm going to give you a sort of perspective from on the ground, as it were, as to the process we went through in Lebanon in going through next generation research and indeed taking the next steps. So looking at the context and background to the studies, looking at the findings in those different time frames, and a little bit in terms of the recommendations and how we've gone on to use the research results. So as this slide shows, the background to the study, we first discussed in late 2018, and we were wanting to conduct the research in the context of the 30th anniversary of the Taif Agreement, which was the political settlement at the end of the Lebanese civil war. And we wanted to survey the attitudes of young people, really a generation who had grown up since the conflict itself. But we started our fieldwork in September 2019 and were then thrown into the context of the October 17th October uprising. And we had findings that spanned pre-revolution and post-revolutionary moment. We were then faced with the multiple challenges in 2020. We, like the rest of the world, faced COVID, but we also faced a deepening political and economic crisis. Nonetheless, we were quite on the point of publishing our results. We'd scheduled it for the second week of August, but we were confronted by the Beirut port explosion. And it really felt inappropriate to either launch the study at that time, but also that need, as Christine mentioned, really to update and validate and see where young people's attitudes had reached after these different factors that were influencing their context. So if I take one of the, or maybe two of the areas of findings, the next generation research generally looks at the attitudes of young people towards education. In the initial study, we got strong quantitative data, really recognizing the value that young people place upon education in Lebanon, and high degrees of participation. An interesting finding was with regard to dropouts, and a finding that in fact young people very much wanted the opportunity for second chance access to education. When we came to the subsequent study, I think we were beginning to see the impacts of the financial crisis in Lebanon and the COVID crisis, and therefore higher degrees of dropout and increasing frustration perhaps in the gap between the aspirations of young people and the education that they were being given in their school and university systems. If we take the area of political participation and youth civic engagement, quite obviously, as young people, indeed all members of society, poured onto the streets in October 2019, we saw an increase in engagement with political life. But by the time we surveyed young people again in early 2021, we could see that political engagement had become lessened and reduced. The challenges that placed upon young people and how to keep them engaged confronts us all today as we face elections in the coming period. Related to some work we were doing for the European Union, we included survey questions about the national youth policy, and again, very salutary to us that in the quantitative research, very few people could cite the policy, and indeed we only found one person in the subsequent Next Step study who had engaged with it. So what did we do with these findings? Well, we've used it to inform education partners, youth policymakers and youth groups around the kinds of work that we feel are evident as priorities for young people as we move forward. So this first example of a focus on marketable skills for youth led us to pilot in northern Lebanon, in Tripoli, a youth life skills program delivered in partnership with civil society organizations. We've also looked at, and with the European Union, at promoting dialogue, youth dialogue with young people. I think I'll finish with, as Christine mentioned, the link to where you can find the research, the Lebanon study, and all of those other studies that she'd referred to, and to welcome and encourage you if anyone's interested in our experience in Lebanon. It is quite a unique context, but nonetheless, there may be elements that apply to your work, and are happy to take questions or meet offline to take that forward. Thanks very much.
Super, thank you, David. Thank you, Christine. Much appreciated. No questions in the chat just now. But Christine, thank you. You've popped the links in, and people can go and look at that at their ease. I mean, one of the things that we've also discussed is we all have research that comes out, and the encouragement is very much that we share it as a group, so that we're not reinventing the wheel and reinvesting in the same research that has been done in the past. We've done previous sessions within the Practitioners Network about monitoring and evaluation. And one of the things that was talked about then was about survey fatigue. So the same people having 100 different organisations coming in and asking them the same question. So in that spirit of joint implementation and working more together, the more that we can share what resources that we have, I think the better. So thank you, both of you, for joining us, and please stay on if you would like to, and you can leave if you don't, but thanks very much for your time. Milena, I think I'm handing over to you, and you're going to take us through OPSIS.
Thank you. I can't promise an equally interesting topic, but I'm going to do my best. And thank you also to the British Council colleagues really for sharing a little bit of experience with this report and how it can be used. I think it's a really good example of the type of research that we should be sharing between us. And then sometimes it's even possible to just do a booster for people with disabilities if you're interested in that population, or to use a questionnaire on a different context or a different part of a country. So I think this is really a good practice also in terms of monitoring. But on to OPSIS. I owe an answer to a person yesterday who asked if we start updating log frame information in OPSIS, do we no longer need to provide hard copy progress reports? So the answer is a little bit longer than I gave yesterday. Actually, it will be this way once OPSIS is fully working, once this part of OPSIS that covers narrative reports is fully functional. But apparently there's bits and pieces that are still under development. So for the time being, the idea is that you populate your log frame in OPSIS and we use it and we start to exercise our skills there. Then we print out a copy and we still file it with a regular progress report until the full narrative reporting is working completely in OPSIS. And then once it's working completely, then we will be able to stop doing this and everything will just move online. But the idea is to completely move online and to not make these hard copy reports anymore eventually. So this is the information I received. And I will share my screen now for the PowerPoint we had. That will explain a bit more about the types of changes that we can expect and also the benefits we can expect from using OPSIS. This. I will give you also links for webinars that are happening for OPSIS at the end of this PowerPoint, because these are really good opportunities to also ask directly to the OPSIS team of my unit and of the OPSIS change management team about any details that you wish to have more information on. I'm not an OPSIS specialist, but I am informed about the changes that it will bring. So let me just see what is going on. No, this is the wrong compartment. Sorry. Monitoring in OPSIS is the one I want. Okay. So our commissioner and our senior management have given us a message that they would like us to monitor results and to make sure that resources are used efficiently. So OPSIS is part of this story because it improves access to information. It improves the standard of that information, the standardization also across countries. and it focuses us more on results rather than just on financial management of projects. So we would like to increasingly have dialogue about what projects are delivering, what changes are we helping to influence, and what is the goal, of course, is to have to contribute to the impact that we wish to have. In terms of EU results monitoring, we have some legal obligations on the right side here. So ensuring corporate reporting on results achieved takes place. We do get questions from the Parliament, from audits on results. So it's very important for us to have information on this. And this is why the log frame is a standard part of every progress report for most operations and interventions. Corporate results are aggregated and reported annually. For this, the Commission uses indicators from the EU Results Framework, soon to be Global Europe Results Framework. And this is fed from projects all over the world, across every partner country that we have. So projects report on these indicators. We quality check the data, add it up, and publish an annual progress report that is then available to be published to the Parliament, to the public, to different audiences. However, in this context, in this work, we noticed that sometimes there is a lack of ownership. Sometimes, actually every year, there is a huge amount of manual work that happens because we have many ROM experts that visit delegations and implementing partners, and that they sift through evaluation reports, progress reports, feasibility studies to really tease out every bit of information that could be used for the annual report of DG INTPA. So this is not a very efficient process. And also there is inexhaustive coverage. So in this, we also have some good practices. On the other hand, we would like to improve INTPA's monitoring practices. Log frames and indicators are the chosen tools to regularly report against results. So we're not starting from ground zero. There is a lot that already is being used every year. But we would like to create a change of attitude to increase focus on these tools and on the information they can provide for management and for accountability and for learning as well. So we would like to improve this through OPSIS. And the main things that you will see in OPSIS are interventions, log frames, and indicators. In terms of monitoring, OPSIS also covers, of course, other things. And it allows also implementing partners and operational managers in the delegation to meet in the same system and to have a communication about results within this system. So you can see on the left that there was CRIS and also some external platforms for results data collection and reporting that the ROM experts were using. Now this will be replaced gradually by OPSIS, and this is a new approach from starting from last year and this year. Whereas before we had administrative and financial entities, so contracts and decisions, now we will have result-based entities. So they are called primary interventions. This can be a group of contracts. It could be a decision. It could be parts of a decision. There will be a lot more freedom for operational managers to define what is the primary intervention. If I'm working on good governance and I have a group of contracts, for example, I can monitor them at a higher level, not only at contract level. So this will create new freedom for monitoring results, depending on what is the operational manager's portfolio. There used to be manual quality control of data done by commission staff and by ROM experts. And we're hoping this will become a more automatic process because OPSIS will standardize some things like disaggregation criteria, sources of data, units of measure. This will hopefully become more standardized in terms of indicators and data that is being reported because the system will automatically check. If you specify a percentage of a unit of measure, you will not be able to enter a narrative text or something like that, which sometimes happens when the log frame is in a Word document. Sometimes the data that is, or the explanation that is entered under the current value has very little to do with the actual indicator or is using the wrong unit of measure and then cannot be compared across years. So this is something that a system like OPSIS can help us to make sure that we have a coherence between our indicators, baseline, and targets, but also many other things across countries. We used to have a lot of customized indicators. Basically, every log frame was a document for itself. There was no exchange of log frames except if there was a program at the regional level or something like that, or a thematic program. So now this will change. We will have core indicators, and I will go through the main types of core indicators. And we hope that these will be used wherever possible in projects and will allow us to have a better analysis of programming trends and results that we either achieve directly or hope to contribute to, like looking at projects that select a certain SDG indicator will be possible and things like that. The process used to be externalized to contractors that we appreciate and love very much, and we're very grateful to our ROM colleagues. But we hope that in the future, this process will be much more done with the leadership of the Commission staff and implementing partners. We used to have the EU results framework. This will now become the Global Europe results framework, and this staff working document is currently under approval. As soon as it's approved, I will share it with Louise and other colleagues, and they can share it with all of you. And as Jan showed, it's posted on Capacity for Dev as well. And I encourage you really to read it if you want to understand more about the latest thinking in the Commission about, or in DG INTPA at least, and NEAR, on monitoring and corporate monitoring at the highest level, really. We used to have more external IT systems, and now we will have one platform for results-based management, which is OPSIS. So this will combine issuing of contracts, approval, and then also log frame and results monitoring, financial monitoring, all in one system. What can be done in OPSIS today? So for ECX internal staff, they go to My Workplace and they can see results based on the log frames that have been encoded and indicators so far. Contracts management, standard things. Programming also, we recently concluded in DG INTPA at least these multi-annual indicative programs. So those are now available in OPSIS in order to promote the use of these indicators in action documents and then from action documents in projects as well. For implementing partners, there is the funding and tender opportunities area of access, or portal as they call it. You can register your organization and you can search for calls for tenders. And the most important part for me, at least, is this results management area. So here we are able to encode log frames, identify indicators within these log frames, and add indicator values as things progress. So I mentioned the concept of intervention. It's not a whole new concept, but it's a group of actions and contracts together flexibly for efficient performance monitoring. Defining the key elements includes a coherent set of inputs and results, a structured standard log frame format, a theory of developmental change, a unit for operational follow-up, so indicators and IT system. This is a screenshot of one of these elements. So this is the intervention logic in the log frame. And basically what the log frame will look like in OPSIS. So in the top part, you can see the current status of the log frame, the health status of the log frame, and then which version it is, when it was last updated, basic details. And then below you see the overall objective. Oops, sorry, I skipped too fast. Overall objective, impact level. So here you can see the result statement and the first indicator for this overall objective. And then below it continues. So the whole log frame will be like this, showing you also visually you're able to see for each indicator how things are going, what are the values that have been encoded on this right-hand side there. And hopefully this will really facilitate the use of the log frame as a management tool. I hope that this will be a screen that all managers will go to when they're looking to find out how a project is doing. In terms of indicators, we have two types. There are core indicators that are being encoded in the system by Unit D4. So these are the ones that show up in a drop-down menu when you're filling out a log frame. You have the ability to search by sector, to search for GERF, Global Europe Results Framework indicators, for SDG indicators. By word, you can type in a term and it will show you the relevant indicators. So this is quite handy. And all of these indicators were discussed and defined in terms of units of measure, disaggregation, sources of data, and whether they are aggregable or not. So not all indicators are aggregable. Sometimes they just give you the national average in terms of the literacy rate, for example, and other SDG data. So don't expect that all of the core indicators you see in OPSIS are going to be the subject of annual results reporting. Only some of them will be used for annual results reporting, and these are the ones from the Global Europe Results Framework. The others are there to improve quality of design, to save time, to make indicators that are international, standardized, or agreed with DG INPA thematic units easily available to users, and hopefully facilitate the completion of the log frame in this way. There are thematic groups for these core indicators, and one indicator can be shown in different groups, which is also useful. And we can have different really groups of indicators. Customized indicators then offer you the freedom to enter free text for an indicator, to define it yourself, because we realize that not everything can be predicted and planned and standardized from the beginning. So we do hope that this system will increase the standardization of indicators at DG INPA and promote the use of certain priority indicators. But at the same time, we realize that this is only a fraction of what DG INPA is funding in the field. So we also, of course, enable users to create their own customized indicators. If a certain indicator is going to be used frequently, for example, by a trust fund, a group of projects or something like that, they can be transformed into core indicators, but this has to be done by Unit D4. So they would need to approve this transformation into a core indicator. And these customized indicators cannot be part of these other groups that we have for core indicators. Once you have used it once, I think it will show up for you again in future time, in the future, but not for example, for your colleagues from other offices that your organization may have. So these are a bit different from the core indicators, which appear to everybody across every country where DG INPA, DG NEAR, and FPI are working. So we spoke about interventions as a concept. Now we need to also mention the level for my primary intervention. The primary intervention can be defined in different ways, and this is what I mentioned a bit earlier also. You could be talking about just one contract. You could be talking about a group of contracts. You could be talking about an action or a group of actions. It's really, this system creates a freedom to define this primary intervention in terms of the manager who is going to be monitoring it. And this will hopefully enhance the focus on results and enable better monitoring, easier monitoring for managers, because they'll be able to group together from different contracts or different actions the parts that are relevant for their results. An indicative timeline of key developments. So in 2021, we had the primary interventions encoding in OPSIS. I don't know why this screen is moving on its own. And we had results data collection with a backup. In the following year, we will have the results data collection done in OPSIS again, this time without a backup, so fingers crossed. And the ROM module and the eval module will also be replaced by OPSIS. And in 2023, we're looking into the thing that I'm mostly looking forward to is this results dashboarding. I think that will be very interesting to see. Risk analysis and also artificial intelligence aided search. So this would be interesting to follow. What is expected in OPSIS in the coming months? We have a deadline of 31st in January for encoding indicator values. So here it's the operational manager and the implementing partners who play a key role. The role of implementing partners is actually optional for the moment because the operational managers are given the freedom to either do this themselves or to involve the implementing partner. 31st of May is also an important date for DG INPA and NIR to do the same thing. So encoding log frames, because FPI has already encoded their log frames. The deadline for us is 31st of May to encode log frames and then indicators values as well. So basically it's the same process just for two DGs. For more information, these are the links to the webinars. You can find them also if you look on INPA Academy. You can find them easily, and they're doing a new series of webinars just now. So I really encourage you to join and find out more or pose any questions that you might have. And there are recordings of all the old webinars from November and December, for example, that I also think are very interesting and useful to see. And here is also the email of the change management team for OPSIS that can answer any questions as well, and also give you lots more sources of information where things are explained even better than I'm able to explain them.